Right, well, good morning, everyone. Darren Doherty speaking. Thank you to all of you who have been able to join us, and to those of you who are going to be watching this a bit later on, welcome to you as well. Today, we get into the Rex proper, and I would say because last week it was more about getting you orientated and getting you familiar with the Agrarians platform, which a lot of you will have done through the various stuff that's online and whatnot. Already, or if you've been to any meetings or whatever that I've done in the past. What we're going to be doing today is getting into what I would say the proper part of the program, which is where we're discussing holistic context. We're doing an introduction to that, and some of the folks that have, that I've been about and have influenced and have been influenced by, and get some of their understandings and insights into this really great method. We're going to talk about some other methods that are out there as well, because not everyone, I've found over the journey that some people don't resonate with the whole holistic context thing. And so what other methods are there that are useful in that? So we'll discuss a bit of that today as well. So I'll just get the screen sharing all working, and let's go from here. So we're just going to go up to the top here. So yeah, week 2, live 1. So the primary, and like as with always, if you've got any questions, maybe just use the Q&A panel that you will have. So find your little Zoom bar that you will have there, and that will help you to just pop in the Q&A, or if you can't find that, just use the chat and I'll answer questions. Otherwise, more than happy to turn your mic on and do that verbally as well. So just put your hand up or something, and I'll try and keep an eye out the corner. I'll keep my eye out for you there. All right, so I'll just pop that there. So I'm looking in the right place. So this book here, there's another one there, I would say is the primary text for this particular topic. It seems to me to be the most current. It was just released last year. It's the 3rd edition. The first edition came out in 1988. And then the next edition, I think, came out at about 90, might have been 10 years later. And then this one more recently. I think this will probably be, unless Alan's time in the departure lounge, as he puts it, is more prolonged than he thinks it is, then this will probably be the last edition that Alan's involved with. So as an octogenarian, pretty savvy one at that, and healthy one at that. So this one is, I think they've done a really good job as compared with the other 2 editions of holistic management. The first one was called Holistic Resource Management, and it was a really, it wasn't a simple read. It was quite academic and so on. And incidentally, those of you who would know or have heard of Bill Mollison, I remember quite well being in Bill Mollison's extensive library in about 1995. I was thinking of this just this morning, actually, because I was writing something about this. I pulled out a copy of Holistic Resource Management out of Bill's library, and about halfway through pulling it out, he said, "Put that back. That stuff's destroying Africa." And so I listened to him as a young fellow. I think I was about 26 or 27 at the time. Popped it back in and didn't open that book for about another 10 years, which I regret now, because there was a lot of insights in there that could have made my life and my clients' work and my work just so much more effective. So sometimes it just goes to show that it's important to not listen to some of the stronger voices that are out there sometimes. This is probably a trap for young players who are surrounded by more charismatic, strong characters sometimes, that it's important to maybe take on a bit of that rebellious streak, and I should have actually gone back in there and grabbed that book and got into it a bit more because, yeah, like I said, I did miss out quite a bit. Why do I think he said that? That's a good question, Tom. I think that the primary reason, and I did speak to Bill about this, or probably would have been about 12, 15 years later, I suppose. Yeah, it would have been about that. Was only a couple of years before he died. The main reason why was because there was a lot of activity in Africa, and I think that Bill had not joined the dots on what Alan was doing, because Alan was promoting, and still does promote, the use of livestock to restore landscapes or restore environments. And Bill, on the other hand, had been going to Africa a lot and was working a lot in Botswana. And what he saw, and this is a really critical point, I think, what Bill saw was the effect of livestock management, in that, you know, a lot of British companies and a lot of large graziers were putting very large barbed wire fences across countries like Botswana, and they were upsetting migratory patterns of native wildlife, ungulates and others, and displacing those in place of cattle. And those cattle were in large herds marauding landscapes in what's known as set stocking. So they were put in one place for a long time, and of course they overgrazed the environment. And in doing so, destroyed that environment. Now, Bill saw that, and like a lot of people, and this is something that we all need to take on, sometimes what you do is you will focus on the effect, not the actual cause. Thank you, my love. Say hello. This is our beautiful eldest daughter, Isabella.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, my love. And so, something we'll deal with in a minute when we look at that. But I think so. Bill was quite rightly angry, and Bill was a fairly angry sort of character at times. And I think that's where that snap of a response came from, was that he was seeing his precious environment, this precious environment being destroyed, and the people, the Indigenous people, who he felt he always had a deep affinity for Indigenous people. So I think it was just an angry response to what he saw, without actually understanding at that stage, at least, the underlying causes for that. And that's something that's a very big part of all of this. And I think that follows through in some of the differences between permaculture, the differences between the way that people who follow permaculture as a methodology view the world, because a lot of what you're doing in permaculture is working on effects, not causes. And part of that, I think, is because you don't actually go in and identify causes from the get-go. Now, that's not a slight against permaculture. Permaculture is a fantastic ecological design system, but like all systems, it has some missing pieces, and so that's part of why we have developed this methodology. There's certainly, permaculture is definitely an influence to what we do, because it's got some really good stuff in it. But you've also got to break it down and see that what actually works in different things. So permaculture is quite good at some things, but it's not very good at other things. So we often will say, as a broad narrative, that holistic management is fantastic at all of this context setting, financial planning, grazing planning, and all of the sort of higher level planning stuff, social planning, etc. But land planning, it's really poor at. When I opened the first holistic management books and looked at the land planning stuff, I went, wow, where'd they get this stuff from? It's like, I couldn't even relate it to an era. It was so poor, really. And that's someone who studied farm planning for the better part of 30 years, and has studied the history of farm planning and its influences. So I just couldn't see it, and I thought, wow, this stuff's really shit, to be quite honest. But then, as someone who'd studied a lot of permaculture, and keyline in particular, and more traditional soil conservation-based or influenced farm planning, that stuff's mostly about trying to fix up things that are broken, or fix up things where you're looking at the effects and not saying, all right, well, what are the underlying causes? And so when one brings those things together, those different system methodologies together, I think that's where you get some really great power in what you're doing. So, which is what we're here to pursue. And sometimes it takes a bit of that. I think that in the evolution of ideas and methodologies and concepts, you get really great ideas from the originators, and then it's the second, and this is where I'd classify myself. It's the aggregators and the integrators, which was what I'd classify myself as, where perhaps there's a pretty reasonable value. There's a few different characters out there who've done that. Terry McCosker is a really big figure in Australian agriculture, and he learnt from Alan Savory when he came to Australia early on, and then realised that some of the stuff that Alan was talking about was not the kind of messaging that a lot of Australian producers would resonate with, and so he changed the message. It's still the same stuff, but he retweaked and adapted a message and some practices that would better suit Australian producers, as someone who was quite familiar with them. And I would say, as a result, he's probably been in front of and worked with more Australian producers than pretty well all of the holistic management certified educators combined. So there's a lot to all of this, as always. But great book, this one. I think that this one is quite easily the most readable. And I think it's the kind of book that anybody or everybody should have, and I would include consumers in this, because there's a lot of value in it for that, for those people as well, at the very least, so that they can be more educated as consumers. We gave a talk the other night in Sydney, which I think I mentioned on last week's Q&A. And it was basically to an urban audience. And a lot of those people were saying, oh, what can we do? And I said, well, you can start by understanding what's going on. And if you're going to be an advocate, there's no point being a poor advocate. You've actually got to delve in a bit. And I Kiss the Ground are doing some work on that, where they've got a soil advocacy training. So you learn the basics about soil and all of this sort of ecosystem stuff, so that at least when you are having those dinner table or dinner party or whatever other conversations with decision makers, you at least have some semblance of an idea of what you're talking about. Otherwise, you're just not going to be taken seriously. So I think that it's important that everybody reads stuff like this, because we're all ultimately influencers in this space. So let's pursue that and what that means. Well, let's start with the holistic management framework. Now, I'm going to just answer line. I'm going to did I do that with this? Or, sorry. Oh, yes, right. I'm just realizing how I've framed this presentation. So the holistic management framework, we're going to go through this today, or parts thereof. This, I think, is a really powerful one-page, single page here. It's if Moses gave us the 10 commandments, well, then this is a framework which provides us with a testament to how humans should behave in interaction with the environment, and to an extent with each other, although the 10 commandments sort of do that job pretty well, in my estimation anyway. The first part that we are going to focus on as in this is the whole under management, and so those decision makers, the resource base, and the money that you have. So who are the people involved? What are the resources that you're working with, and what money do you have available? And I'll just make again a distinction. There's some people out there with different methodologies who don't put a lot of focus on money, and that's a flaw. And they're often the same people who are struggling with money as a result because they're not acknowledging it. So we do and have seen that in particularly those who follow more alternative economic strategies. Now, there's nothing wrong with those strategies if they're all working, but it's just a reality that we live in a particular system, and it's pretty hard not to live in that system and flourish in that system unless you play by some of those play with some within some of those contexts. Let's proceed, because I'll come back to these in more detail. But this is the broad system that we're talking about or the broad framework that we're referring to when we talk about holistic management. And this book is basically a book that explains each and every one of these, as it were. Now, the holistic context, there's a few different characters who've had a bit of a different play at this, and the ones that I'm going to focus on today are Alan and Jody and the Savory Institute's work in developing a holistic context, in which was outlined in this 2016 book. And that's where they look at the quality of life, the future resource base, and the statement of purpose, particularly for organizations. And so that's what constitutes what's known as a holistic context. So some sort of a statement about the quality of life that you want to have, the future resource base that you want to build and see in the future, and some sort of a statement of purpose. Now, Helen Lewis, we've worked with over the time, and I think we've got Ray and Samantha have worked and are good friends with Helen up in southeastern Queensland. There, they would be familiar with her approach, which is, I would say, the version 2 of all of this. So version 1 was quality of life of holistic, and what was called holistic goal was quality of life, future resource base, and quality of life, forms of production, future resource base. We'll talk about this in a minute. And then version 2 is when Savory shifted everything from holistic goal to holistic context. And to start with, they went quality of life, quality forms of production, future resource base. So that's version 2. And then version 3, really with the onset of the Savory Institute and that gathering and that sort of, what's the right word? Well, just an evolution of some of the ideas and practices here. They dropped forms of production and shifted towards statement of purpose instead. So we'll explore that as we go along here this morning. Helen Lewis stays, I think, a bit more with version 2, and I personally am okay with that, which is why I, in practice, I think it's a good decision that Helen's made. It's quite practical, because sometimes for some people, some of this stuff can be a bit lofty. A lot of people struggle with this kind of stuff anyway, and so I find it instructive to meet people where they're at, as opposed to putting things way outside of their sphere of comfort. And so I think that what Helen's doing it is really effective in that way, and I'm sure that Ray and Samantha would probably agree, having worked with her for some time now. So with Helen, we're looking at the whole under management and identifying those people. Who are the decision makers? What's the resource base? Who are the people involved? The assets that are involved, and what's the money? What are the income generators that are there? And then in terms of the context itself, create a quality of life statement, create some forms of production, or identify what the forms of production are that are going to support that quality of life, and then what kind of future resource base are you building in terms of various forms of capital over time. Now, I won't go through all of this in detail because you all have access to it, but in the climate chapter, which we wrote now in 2015, and I would say actually needs some updating, in the climate chapter of the Agrarian's Handbook, we look at this climate layer, which is what we're still in within this REX program, is that we're looking to establish the context of individuals, their families, the community, and the enterprise, and how they relate to the landscapes in which they work. You want to profile the social, biological, and financial risks and opportunities that are available. You want to ascertain the regulatory frameworks, the constraints and opportunities that exist, and determine the patterns and extremes of the biospheric climate, the weather patterns, to understand the potential or associated risks and opportunities. So that, in summary, is what we look at when we look at the climate layer. And so, as we say here, how to proceed? Well, we start with holistic context and do all of that work. And, you know, you can use the resources of the Savory Institute, Holistic Management International, and there's some others here which we'll share with you to help you with that. But it's important that you look at your climate, the biospheric climate, and see how that's all working for you. And then look at developing an understanding about how you fit in the world from a climate perspective. And then also, if you need to develop any formal agreements, then we talk about memorandums of understanding and how that might work with you, and any regulatory frameworks that you might need to navigate as you wade your way through the sea of red and green tape. And then run through the checklist, which some of you have already done, I've noticed, which is great. And some with really, really great replies, which are really, really helpful. So read through all of these. Again, I would say that our approach, having been written in 2015, is very much in alignment with what Helen has put forward. So you'll see some familiarity there. So I'll let you read through those when you get the chance. All right, well, let's go back to the sort of official version, if you like. So these decision makers, you know, the sort of whole under management. So holistic management's a fairly interesting program in that I think that it definitely applies to the individual, but the individual within a community context. So I would say a lot of people who are in other methodologies, I'll talk about permaculture, for example. Permaculture often, I would say, focuses on the community first and then the individual second to an extent. And really in permaculture, there's not much consideration of individuals as such in the planning process, and I think that that's a mistake, and that's one of the reasons why we introduced, or we really led that when I was involved fairly heavily in permaculture. I did a pretty big lot of work in introducing holistic management to permaculturalists, because I'd identified that it was a really big missing piece. And some people, interestingly, resisted that. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I've started to understand it now, and that that it is, there is some underpinning in a sort of a right versus left approach here, that in terms of the political sphere, that a lot of people who are involved in, say, the left of politics will view the community first and the individual second, whereas the people on the right tend to look at individuals first and then the community second. And so there's an ideological difference there. And I would say it's really interesting that if I was to do a straw poll of people who follow holistic management and who they might vote for, I would tend to say they probably are centre-right, whereas people who are involved with permaculture, I would say, are largely centre-left. And so there's some political resonance there which flows through this, and the different levels of attraction, but which is very, very interesting. Now, let's go now. It's important, and it's been interesting looking at people from the permaculture side of things, who've been studying, I would say, at a high level, holistic management, and therefore they haven't really delved into it sufficiently, that they put their finger right on the individual. Because what we're asking you to do is to look inside of yourself and say, what makes me happy and what drives me to do the things that I do as an individual? Because each and every one of you are going to be doing something absolutely different to everyone else, you know. So, and I believe, and from what I can see, that I think that that's really important to get into and to understand. I think it's really important. If you agree that it's important to be the best person that you can be, then being the best person that you can be is generally going to, by default, mean that you have to be a good person with other people. And so you're going to do that in a community context as well as doing in your own context. So make yourself happy. Well, what makes you happy? Generally it is, and this is what I see from the replies that we get to people developing their holistic context, is that they say, well, you know, I want to be a good community person. I want to be good to my fellow person. You know, good is something that is a word that's often used when people view the kind of things that they want to be themselves, that they want to better in themselves. Well, that generally associates you with others. But first you need to look at yourself. I mean, it's your brain, it's your eyes, it's your mouth, it's your hands, and it's your action that's ultimately the expression of you. But that expression is to other people and to other organisms and to this planet. So it's important to, I think, create a sort of a constitution for yourself. And in part, religion has helped us with that over time. And a lot of people now are sort of casting aside religion. And in some ways, some of this stuff, I think, is replacing some of that. Some of it is enhancing some of it, because I know quite a few people are religious, or have particular belief systems that they follow. And they take them so far, but they still need perhaps some, personal, professional development to help. And I think that this is where this stuff comes in. So with that, when we look at the whole under management, we have decision makers, we have a resource base, and we have money. So we need to identify who all of those characters are as decision makers, where they fit in the whole hierarchy of things, which is another part of this. A lot of people are trying to work against hierarchies, whereas I personally believe that hierarchies are completely natural and exist across all forms of nature. And whilst some people would define being a human as being that you are above some of the or different to the rules of nature, it's pretty tough to develop a system without an effective system without some form of hierarchy involved. So what is that? Where are people in that? The resource base. So what are all of the parts that, so in most of you here have a farm. This is a farm planning program. So most of you have a farm project or a property that you're working on. So what is it? But then what are the resources within that? And have they been identified and well? And then what sort of money is available to the project? Different people on this call have different access to different volumes of money. So what's that going to mean for what you can do and how you might behave in the way you develop a property? It tends to be that people who have more money than others or access to more money than others at different times in their lives tend to behave differently in interaction with that landscape than those who've never had any and haven't got any now. I see this all of the time when I go to properties and I see, I might already know that someone has some wealth, some financial wealth. And it's interesting when you go to those properties and you can see how that's being expressed in a variety of different ways. I go to, I drive, when you drive into that, and this is something I miss out on a bit, a lot through these online programs, is, when someone would ring me up and I'd turn up at their property, I am, intent is a wonderful thing. And when you have the intent of observation of all of these holistic outcomes, it's pretty wild, to be quite honest. And you have to be careful because it's the judgment genie which is being turned on all of a sudden here. So I'll drive up a person's driveway and I'm looking at what's the condition of their fencing, what cars are they driving, what models, what's their condition, how's the place being kept, how much machinery is there, have they got a lot of machinery lying around, how's it, what conditions it in, da 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 da. All of this stuff that you're taking in, that you're soaking in, and you have to be careful as a person to not slip into forms of judgment which are judgmental in a negative sense, as opposed to looking at it as a rational judgment where you're going, okay, well, I'm trying to frame who I'm dealing with here and the situation that has brought them to, the sort of life experiences and influences that they've had that's got them up to this point. Because that will then help guide you in the advice that you would give about how they might proceed. And that in itself is the development of some sort of a context as a consultant to the underlying conditions that people have. Now, that will be also about the landscape they're working in. They're on this type of landscape. That's going to be tough if this is what they're looking to do, and so on and so forth. So we do look at those things. And I would ask you to do the same yourself. Perhaps take yourself out of yourself or out of yourselves as couples or whomever, and just take a step back and maybe look at yourselves from above and sort of go, yeah, well, gee, we have kept a lot of gear that when was the last time we used it? And you might then create some rules around that, like people do with their wardrobes. When you see the people who talk about decluttering at their lives, one of the things that a lot of them say is that, all right, well, if you haven't worn that piece of clothing for 1 year, then get rid of it. And you might well say, if I haven't used that piece of machinery that's been lying around for 1 year, then get rid of it, liquidate it and turn that capital into, that's part of your resource base. You may not have any money because it's all tied up in all of this capital that's lying around. Well, get rid of it so that you can turn that capital, because you say, oh, gee, I can't afford all that pipe, or, oh, gee, I can't afford the new fencing. Oh, gee, I can't afford some new genetics, or, I can't. Well, maybe it's because you've got all of this capital lying around that you really need to get on with and deal with and declutter and make this a pathway for yourself in the improvement of yourself and of the environment that you're working in. Maybe it's just time you did that. So this, you might take that as an opportunity that when you actually go through this cold, hard look at yourself as a decision maker and who's involved, and look at your, a cold, hard inventory of your resource base, you can go, well, gee, I've got a lot of stuff that I've accumulated that I just do not use. And you might even create a table on that. Here's your list. When did I last use it? Will I ever probably use it again? Or, you can look at it and go, well, if I am to use it again, would I probably be better to just hire someone because it's cheaper for me to hire someone with that bit of gear than it is for me to keep this bit of gear? You see this stuff all the time. So holistic context, as we mentioned before, that statement of purpose in this context of the holistic, of the latest Savory Institute framework. So creating some sort of a statement of purpose over what you're doing, and then quality, statements around the quality of life that you want to have and the future resource base that you want to move into. So let's look at that from the examples from within the holistic management book here. So this is one holistic context that's been created by a government agency managing a national forest. Now, I would say, and we'll look at this because I've got one from one of Helen Lewis's clients later, just so that we've got the comparisons here. And the great thing is too, because of the way that we've built the Regrarians workplace, you have access to the holistic context of the last group and the last 13-week group, and the holistic context that people did under Javan Banakovich's tutelage when we did the first two online Rexes, which were the 10-week version. So you have access to all of that. So you can certainly go back, and if you wish, if you've got the time or want to make the time, go and have a look at other people's work and see how they've done this, and see how that might influence you in the way that you express yourself in this way. I mean, what we're doing here, I'm not saying you need to do this. I think it's useful. It's certainly helpful to us to know what you're about and what you are trying to achieve, so that when it comes time for you to develop if we look at this, this is you developing your rules for the game, and then when you actually start the physical farm planning, well, the physical farm planning should be influenced by what your constitution is. And that's what I would say this is more broadly. It's your sort of rules for what you want to do. So when we look at this one, it's, the statement of purpose is to ensure that this forest is managed sustainably and for the benefit of the nation. Now, that statement of purpose, think about this in terms of, it's for you, but it might also be the thing that you put on your website, or that elevator pitch, that when you meet that person on the elevator and they go, oh, what's your farm about? And you've got this instant one-liner that enables them to understand what you are about and the distinctiveness that you have with your operation. And I think that's really important because people will ask that. A lot of you are going to be doing things that are differently to those around you, and a lot of you are going to be involved in direct commerce of your product with other people. So it's helpful to have some sort of grab that you can just grab. And I think that the process of doing that, of developing that, is also instructive in itself. It's also part of your personal professional development. So quality of life. So these are some of the objectives. And a lot of these, as we see, if I was to collate all of the hundreds of holistic contexts that people have developed now in our programs, there's a lot of similarities. And this is the thing that you see all of the time when you get about anyway, is that most people want the same sort of things. I had two different Uber drivers in Sydney last week and had good chats with them, and they both happened to be from Afghanistan. One was about 70 and one was 23. and we were talking about Afghanistan, and they were both interested in agriculture because Afghanistan's an agrarian culture, and going through all of that. And they both had different perspectives given their ages and whatnot. But they're, you know, we were both talking about the tragedy of it, and they were both saying, you know, gee, we all want the same thing. We all want to be happy. We all want to care for our families, and we all want to be good people. And it's just a few assholes that upset that. And, you know, I said, you know, look, that's the same wherever I go. I worked in, you know, I was talking about other dangerous places that I've worked in. Mexico. Mexican people, and people don't go to Mexico because it's dangerous, but Mexico is filled with, as all countries are, with the most beautiful people, and it's just a few assholes who, and just, there just happens to be a few more assholes who have guns, who make it bad for people. And it's upsetting, but most people, the point being is that most people want the same things. And that's what we're seeing. That's not to say that you should just go and cookie cutter someone else's work. It's important that you do the work on yourself, because there will be some distinctiveness that you pull out. So to be proud of our work and to be respected for it, I think a lot of us would resonate with that, to live meaningful lives in a caring, collaborative environment, using our talents and so on, and that they're acknowledged and utilised, to share what we do with our families and people in the surrounding communities, to manage this forest so that it provides an excellent financial return to the nation and an even greater return in biological capital. And then looking at the future resource base. Now, a lot of people think of resources just as physical resources, but there are a whole range of different resources. And I would look at these, I would use the term capital in this sense. So you could say your future capital base as well. And our friends, Gregory Landway and Ethan Rowland, who are on the workplace, and we have referenced their work before, developed what's called the 8 forms of capital as a list. And it's, I can't think of it off the top of my head. We can look at it this week. The experiential capital, social capital, spiritual capital, and so on, natural capital, and then financial capital, and there's a couple, 2 or 3 others. These are all forms of resources, if you like, that you might build over time. And I think, like resources, if you look at resources and capital are somewhat similar. They're things that you can build up and then you might draw upon later on. And that's part of, you know, that's part of what any organisation or people in a community will do. The person who's an arsehole and a taker all the time will not have built up any social capital, and when the time comes, it's only going to be those people who are particularly benevolent who will probably help that person if that person gets themselves into a tight spot. A lot of people will just, you know, if they break down by the side of the road, they just drive on by because you've been an arsehole your whole life, you've never given anything, and so on. Whereas the person who's been a giver their whole time and is given, and been a contributor, I might say, as opposed to a giver, it's likely that someone's going to stop and help them immediately because they've built that social capital up. These are things that we know. Also, with our landscapes and the droughts that people have had here in this country and elsewhere are good examples of that. Those people who have been able to manage their land in better times so that particular natural capital resources have been built, when that landscape has come under stress, some of that capital is able to be drawn upon. So when you have a drought in a landscape, well, the landscape suffers too. It has a different operation, it goes into a different operating mode in the absence of reliable water. And so it compromises itself as a result in order to survive. And some things don't survive. But it's the the degree to which it can withstand that and how resilient it is as an ecology, as an ecosystem, is completely dependent on what state it was in at the onset of that drought or of that duress. Or fire, for example. You have a fire run through. Some landscapes respond really, really quickly and in particular ways. And then some landscapes respond in a different way, maybe slower, and have a different response. And that's going to really depend on how it is when it starts, on what forms of capital, on what state of capital it has. So this is another holistic context. This one is, and it's interesting that there's an absence of a statement of purpose. So one might say that the statement of purpose in this new version of the holistic context has been removed for individuals as opposed to for organisations. Excuse me. So in this case, this is a holistic context created by a middle-aged couple to manage their lives. So this is where they're looking to be engaged in meaningful work for the rest of our lives. Interestingly, even that term, if you were to get a young couple, they're probably not talking about the rest of their lives because they haven't realised that they're probably going to die yet. They're still immortal. So, but as one gets older, well, then you realise the use-by date's coming. So, you you tend to focus a bit more on legacy and all of those sorts of things. I'm 51 and I think, geez, I wish I had planted more trees at this particular time of that particular species, because selfishly I'd be enjoying them, or I'd either enjoy their shade or enjoy the view of them. I was at George's the other day, place I've worked with for years, and planted about 140,000 trees. About 40,000 trees, and we've planted about 140 species, got the numbers mixed up. And there were some oak trees there that I planted in 2000 and 2004, and they're stunning. And it was so nice to feel the air under them. And, George was, so I was, about 30, 35 at the time, and George was about 45, and we're both, he's about 60 odd now, and I'm 50 odd, and we were both able to enjoy them. And that was that, now that we're older and we realise, that's, the use by date's closer than the start date, most likely, it's really great that we've got these things in. And so your perspectives do change as you get older. And it's interesting to talk to some younger people who take on that mindset, especially when they do listen to how quickly life does seem to go by, how important it is that if you can, get in early. Really interesting to read, if you do get a chance, just as an aside, have a look at Rowan Reed's book. Rowan's in the workplace as well. Rowan, as a 25-year-old, co-wrote the still is a classic book called Agroforestry in Australia and New Zealand. It's a really great piece. But he's written more recently a book which is a great Christmas present for any of you who are looking, or something for the festive season if you don't celebrate Christmas, as a gift. It's a book called Heartwood. And interestingly, because Rowan was 25 when he was able to get the property that he has worked on, and that's when he started planting trees. And Rowan would be 60 now. So he's enjoying having had the maturity, I suppose, at that age to develop this landscape, which he can now enjoy and draw the capital from, which is fantastic. So anyway, so that you've probably all read what I've been rambling on. You've probably read all of this stuff. It's interesting. I mean, you look at it to explore and experience wild places. You could probably break some of this down and see what kind of people these are. That they're probably not producers. They're not on the land. They might be living in town, and but they do enjoy the environment and enjoy influencing that as much as they can. They want to They want to see that the land surrounding our town will be stable and productive, and so on. And that drives them to make the particular decisions, even around the way they consume things, who they support, maybe in politics, or who they support in business through their consumption, and so on, as far as all of that's concerned. Now, let's have a look at one of Helen Lewis's clients. And Helen has worked with a number of people, and I took this when I came up, and Ray and Samantha were one of the people whose properties we went through. Helen invited us up earlier this year to go and do a sort of a day at each property, and go to that property and go through the Gregarians platform and sort of get a bit of a sense of where people were at. We did that in the morning, and then in the afternoon we wander around the property and look at some of the focus areas. And this was one of those properties, and I've anonymised this so that it's we don't identify the people involved, but I'm sure Ray and Samantha probably will have seen this, so they know whose it is. It's not theirs, let's put it that way. But I thought it was useful because it was a very simple and well put together holistic context, and one that, as a template, a lot of you would find really useful to follow. And that is the thing. We do have a few templates here. So the whole under management, who are the decision makers? Now, years ago, and I think a few of us came to the same conclusion. Initially, it was just who are the decision makers, and people like me started to go, okay, well, actually, there's a hierarchy of decision makers, because when you read the holistic management literature, who are decision makers? Well, everyone's a decision maker. Everyone who you're involved with is some kind of a decision maker. So, who are they, and how are they involved with you? And so that's something that we've addressed. Excuse me. That we've addressed in our template, which some of you will have read through when you looked at the Gregarians platform checklist. We've looked at, we've broken it down and said, well, who are the primary decision makers, who are the secondary decision makers, and who are the tertiary? So how do you define these people? Well, I would define, the way I look at it is, on the way I've defined the primary decision makers are those who have the power of veto in decision making. So in some cases, it may be that your bank or a financier or a consultant who's been appointed may actually be a primary decision maker. And so because they have the power of veto over a lion's share of decisions. I do know this for a fact. I've got a number of clients who I've worked with over the years, particularly in the cereal growing field, who have had agronomists appointed by their bank, and those agronomists or their consultant has the power of veto over what crops they grow and how they grow them, and the materials that are used to support that crop's growth, and who it will be marketed to, and so on. So you might say that, well, I would say in that case that's modern serfdom, and that the couples involved in that circumstance are the serfs, and the lord is the bank and their sheriff, who's the agronomist, and so they make the decision. So you effectively are a secondary decision maker. Now, in those contexts where I've worked with people like that, guess what their prime motivation has been in life? Reduce debt, so that they take away the power and take out of their hierarchy their overlords as a result. This is stuff that goes on. It's not making this up. It's out there already. So I think that that's an acute example of how this can be, but you've got to have that honesty about things. And that's unfortunately what a lot of people don't have. They just go along with life and suffer it, and as opposed to go along with life and actually work some of this stuff out. And to work it out, the first thing you've got to do is look in the mirror. And what I mean by that is, yes, look in the mirror, but also look at it on paper. Understand you and understand what's going on in the fabric of your operation, and then you can start to make decisions about making changes. We've done that. I've had to do that a lot. I mean, I've had to. My wife is a very honest person, and she gives me a lot of advice about what kind of person I am, and I'm very grateful for that. I don't think, and so as a result of that, I'm continually trying to make changes, or continually trying to improve the way we run Regrarians, and the way that we run this whole show is continually being tweaked on the basis of all of the influences. And I will show you, if I get a chance, the holistic context, and I think I will have shared it, but I did share it with everyone when we asked you to join the Regrarians workplace, but I don't expect that everyone's read everything, but I'll give you a bit of an indication about what that looks like, because that may in itself be instructive to see how an operation like ours has used this particular model. So when we look at this, in this case, these people, I don't think, had too much debt, just had a bit of a government loan and a family loan. But they're in the traditional sense, well, they're quite traditional, and there's a wife and a husband, there's a mum and a dad, and there's a daughter and son. Now, over time, I would say when I look at that, well, the daughter and son must be quite young, because if they were older, then they would be up the hierarchy of decision making. Hopefully they're not 50, and the mum and dad or the wife and husband are still in control of the checkbook completely. And you do see a bit of that out there as well. But yeah, I would say, and knowing these people, I know it to be the case, that they're quite young. But these are the things that, this decision making and this whole holistic context is not something that's stuck in stone. It's an evolving beast, and so one needs to, if you're going to take this on as a process that you use, then it's something that needs to be revised. And this is where you have that what's called want-be and wint-be, working on the business and working in the business. So this is the working on the business stuff, where you're sort of taking the look outside and working on the business and how it's going to improve and how you're going to improve, as opposed to working in the business, which is where we're looking at what are all of the things that we can do operationally within, but which are ultimately influenced by the want-be analysis. So the resource base in this case, they've looked at the people that are involved, so family, friends, neighbours, suppliers, etc., tourism board, tourists. So they're obviously got a bit of stuff going on as far as tourism is concerned, which gives a bit of distinctiveness to their farm business. The assets, so looking at from that perspective, all of the bits that they've got, which you can see they've got a few, and so some of you would take up a few pages on this. It's like when you go to clearing sales or look at the clearing sales in the newspapers, and you go, man, oh man, those people had some gear. And you sort of look at it and go, and then the capital that's gained from that is not actually captured until they've retired or died, which is a bit late. How many places do we know where that's been the case? You go to that clearing sale, and the person's, it's a deceased estate, and there's tens, or in fact some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gear which gets liquidated, and a landscape which is impoverished because people have got all of this capital bound up in degenerative infrastructure that doesn't generate any money. for their operation, as opposed to, I've got to do a bit of this myself actually. So I'm going to point the finger fairly and squarely back at myself. That as opposed to only having the gear that you really need, and that is, if you put rules to it, assets which generate value and generate wealth. If you put those rules to things, well, then there's some things you're just not going to keep as a result. And then what kind of money income generators do you have? So all of the different stuff that they've got there, and then the capital that's available to them, financial capital that's available to them in terms of loans as well, and finance. And the context, so they've gone through a whole list here, which I'm sure many of you have read already. And these are we. So this is where families come together, and often how it works, I think, is, and as I've seen, is that when you've got a family, you might go away individually. So a lot of you might be in couples, or or you might have a small organisation. You might all develop individually a holistic context for yourself, which is your personal context, and then if you're working in an organisation or in a family, you might bring that together and then get the whiteboard out or whatever it takes, a bit of paper, butcher's paper or whatever, and combine those. Put them all out, and you realise, gee, we actually share a lot of objectives that are the same. So we just share a lot of objectives. So why don't we just combine those when we're developing our quality of life statement? Now. And then you've got this. Now, interestingly, I think it was on this first online Rex that we did, a few people had developed, this was under Javan Banakovich's tutelage. He does an excellent job at all of this. But a few of them had got down to the point where they'd had a 1-pager or a 2-pager like this, and they put it on their fridge, which I thought was really cool. We all did, actually, and we thought, gee, this is great. And if I don't know if any of them are here now. I don't think they're on the call today, but there might be some. And Pai Wong, who's on here, he was one of the people who was on that first Rex, so he would remember that. But these are people who put that up, and then they still walk past that every day, and it's kind of like a reminder of what they're about. And it's kind of like their rules of the game. And when people come over, they go, oh, wow, you've actually gone through all of this. This is what you are about. And it's fantastic. And it really, really does help people. I think it's a really helpful thing to do. So forms of production, if people see this, you can imagine if people would have come over from the outside and they stand at your fridge with a beer when you're over at a dinner party or whatever, and they look in there and they go, right, gee, you guys have really thought this through, haven't you? And doesn't that then influence the way that they think about you? Doesn't that then influence your future resource base in the way that we might look at here, where, we've got our forms of production and we've identified all of that. But we've got a future resource base where we're seen and known to be, right? So we've got this reputation. We built. This is our reputation. You might say our social capital, our community capital. Our community must be, our land must be, our home must be, our equipment and infrastructure must be. That's a really good set of 5 questions, if you like, that will capture a lot of what. We'll capture much of what you want or should discuss when it comes to future resource base and how things must be. Not should be, must be. Because as soon as it becomes must, it's not should or could, it's must. It is how it has to be. And then that gives you some boundaries as to how things must be. So if they're not that way, then you break in your own rules. And people who break their own rules tends to hurt a bit. So, and especially when it's happening in a family context and when these things have been developed by a family. Right, so before I get to Regrarian's holistic context and what we developed there and the template that we developed, here's a whole series of links. Now I'm going to go through some of those, so I might just quickly have a look. And I didn't prepare for this earlier because I didn't think about it. Let's just get the holistic, our own holistic context. Now, where did I put that? Any questions while I'm waiting there? If anyone's got any questions that they want to ask or points that they want to add, just to pop that in. Oh, I know where I put it, I think. Here we go. I knew I had it somewhere. Anyone got anything? Let's see any hands up. Surely there is something that someone wants to add. Oh, goodness me, there's so many windows open. There we are. Okay, this is from Ray and Samantha. Sam, suggestions for involving young children in holistic context making. I think Ray and Sam, I think that well, the best thing to do is, and it depends on how young they are, of course, as well. It may be just a preteen. It may be that you just if you deem, and you'll make this judgment, if you deem that they have the capacity to not glaze over when you explain some of this stuff in a very basic terms. And I know that you have created something similar to what I just presented then from your colleagues in your part of the world. It may be that you even take someone else's and share that with them, and say, what do you think about this? So if they can read and they can comprehend and don't glaze over and are somewhat, if they're interested in it, then I think that that's a possibility. It may be that they're just not interested at this stage, and it may be that you as a parent, as their primary decision maker, and I think this is part of what Joel Salatin makes very good points on this, is that you have a lot of capacity as a parent living on a landscape, in a production on a farm, to be able to direct children in particular ways through them running things. Like, so let's say, for example, you say to your kids, what I'm going to give you. You sit around at the table one night and you say, well, how about I give each of you the potential to pick a particular animal or enterprise. So you want to grow some veggies, let's say, and one of them says, I want to grow tomatoes in pots and sell them to you. And I know you guys grow veg. So let's say one of the kids says, I want to grow tomatoes and sell them to you. I'm going to grow them from seed and I'm going to sell them to you as I'm going to trade with you, whatever, those tomatoes, which you will then grow on. And you go, yeah, sure, all right. Well, you do that, and these are the response. We're relying on you to do that. Of course, you might, still order some tomatoes from somewhere else because that child may not carry through with it. But you might have another child who, this is the Salatin thing. They've said, I think it was Daniel, their son, who wanted to take on rabbits, and he took on rabbits, and he really took on rabbits. And they thought, gee, we thought he was just going to grow a few rabbits, not that he was going to ultimately become the United States' foremost authority on rabbits. But it was that kind of thing. Now, over time, of course, that's going to build responsibility and maturity into that child, which they may not otherwise experience. And therefore, that gives them, I would say, the accelerated capacity to be able to intellectually deal with this kind of questioning and self-questioning. As I understand it, a lot of children don't necessarily have that capacity early on. It's not until late teenagehood that they start to shift from looking at themselves first and others around them second. It does take a bit of time. But that will depend on the child and how they're being raised and the circumstances that they find themselves in. So how early they've had to grow up, in other words. And so, yeah, I think the first thing to do, Ray and Sam, would be to at least have the conversation. Like things like, do you know that we've done this? What do you think about it? Here, have a read sometime about what we've done and how you and what you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Bring them into the tent from that perspective, and they'll probably go, "Oh, we don't do that. You guys are liars," or something like that, as kids do. Kids are very honest. It's one of the reasons why we suggest to parents one thing. This is as an aside, but something that's quite related. Children are really, really good at environmental monitoring or ecosystem monitoring, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. But years ago, Kirk Gadzia, one of my mentors, holistic management guy, he developed with another guy a thing called the Bullseye. And the Bullseye is this rangeland monitoring tool, and it's really good. It's a dartboard with a whole range of different parameters that you're assessing. And I found myself out on doing field days with grazing clients, and often found that we would be out, like in outback Queensland or wherever, and the kids would be there, 10, 11, 12, 13 sort of kids. So that sort of age, the 10, 11, 12s, that's when they've got a fairly good amount of comprehension. And they don't get distracted, they don't go off and daydream so quickly, that's what I've found anyway. And by that stage, they're generally, if they're living farm kids, then they've already got some jobs to do. So they already understand that if they don't do their jobs, well, then deaths can occur, and that's hurtful. And so there's responsibility inbuilt to their actions. There's consequences. They understand that. So we would work with those kids to work with them to say, all right, well, one of the things, how about you take on the monitoring? Because a lot of these kids as well were schooled at home. So they were schooled they were using the School of the Air, and they were generally interested in their landscape. And we thought, well, gee, this is a great tool, that because so much of what's happening in agriculture now is about disempowering and disinteresting the next generation in what you're doing in agriculture and in all of this, as opposed to engaging them somehow. So using the Bullseye tool, which is a very simple tool, we went through it and we said, all right, well, how much ground cover is there? And, you don't need a degree or to have some lofty, high-level understanding to be able to assess ground cover. In fact, just about everything I would say everything that is within Kirk's Bullseye platform, and also in Graham Hand's enhanced landscape function analysis, a 10-year-old child can handle this, no drama at all. So have them do it. The reason for it is A, because it gets them engaged, and B, is because they're brutally objective. Whereas if you do it, then you'll probably be kind on yourself. You'll either be and you'll either be too hard on yourself, or you'll be soft on yourself, and you'll sort of back off on the judgment, on the real judgment that needs to be made here. And it gives the kids a bit of it gives them a good seat at the table, which I think is really useful, and it plays into the the amazing level of observational power that a child has when they're given the license to have it. They have it. We know that. I mean, because kids come up with things all the time. They see things that can't be seen, that we miss all the time. If only you're able to give them some possibility there, and I think that that's a really good way of doing it. So that in itself is a way of, that to me is, and I'm a big advocate for monitoring, and I think monitoring is an enterprise in itself, and how you monetize that, how you reward that is another matter, and that's something for discussion. But I think that that's another way that one can have people be involved in holistic context making from the perspective of what's the context of our landscape right now. If you don't what's the context of our whole under management of our resource base, and if we can understand that better, then we can start to make decisions and respond to that in a better way. So I think that's another option for you there, Sam and Ray. How did Alan do it? Any recommendations for, this is from Tom, answer live. This is from Tom Fitzpatrick. Any recommendations for introducing this into organisations? It's a good question. I think that that's a slowly approach. I know, Tom, that you're working in an organisation, and one of the best things I could suggest is maybe do a sort of a short presentation, something as much shorter than what I've got here. So something like a 10 or 15 minute. Maybe have a look at some of the Savory Institute resources and see if there's a short 10-minute or something YouTube that is short enough to capture people's attention. Yeah, at least say, well, can we have a conversation about this? We've, in the world of agricultural landscape management, a lot of people in the world are using this tool now, and it's proved to be useful. Do you want to have a look at it, or can we have a look at it? And it might be that a lot of people just glaze over, and if that's okay, but there might be key decision makers in there, usually the early adopter types and the innovator types, who will initially jump on board and be a bit of a support for you in doing that. And then once they get on board, and this is the way the world works generally, is that once the early adopters follow the innovators, and once there's some demonstration by them of the value of these innovations, then the early and late majority will follow thereafter. And so understanding that psychology, of the psychology of the diffusion of innovation, which is from Everett Rogers' book of the same name, The Diffusion of Innovations from 1963, that once you understand some of those processes, then it's helpful for you to introduce things to people who perhaps would be reluctant otherwise. And this has been studied pretty well in the way that people do extension work and so on. So I would recommend, just finding a few key people who you would have observed are high on openness, and I'll get to this in a moment, and therefore likely to be innovators. Bring them into the tent. Let's have a discussion. Let's talk about the value that we could see in doing something like this. Get it done, and then off you go. Really helpful, I think, to show examples of other people's work, which is part of the reason why I've done this the way I have, because I think it's helpful to sort of break down because if you can see that people who are like you, that you identify, have done this, and they've done it in particular ways, it's really, really, it disarms the whole process, makes it a lot less intimidating, you might say. So I think, so Alan, how has he done it? Well, in some cases, Alan has, as far as I know, and talking to him, he's gone, and I talked about this last week, he's gone into organizations and said things like, can we all agree on one thing? And people go, yeah, let's try and agree. This is because even in organizations, you have disparate parties and factions or whatever else you want to call it, different belief systems, so on. Can we all agree that management is holistic? And then there's an exploration of what, well, okay, I'm not going to agree to anything just because you say it. Well, let's understand what does management being holistic actually mean. So you explore that in some sort of way, and that might be something that's facilitated to help with that. So there's a variety of ways that one would do that, and that's one way that I know that has been done. If there's and some people will do that where there's conflict as well. There's a lot of really good stuff that's come out of nonviolent communication work and conflict resolution work, and some of that stuff actually works where there isn't a conflict. Well, some conflicts are obviously really acute, and then some conflicts are really minor. And you can use the tools of conflict resolution even when no conflict seems to exist in terms of pathways. Now, I'll give you an example of that. Abe Collins and I facilitated a workshop with the Marin County Board of Supervisors in Marin County in California years ago on they'd invited us to help them to work on the Marine Carbon Project and its startup, which we were instrumental in with John Wick and Peggy Rathman and others. Anyway, Abe introduced a technique that I hadn't seen before, which is where he looked at worst and best possible outcomes. Now, the psychology of that was, and this is sort of related to what we're talking about here, the psychology of it was that if you first start with, so the question in this context was, and you'll get this, what would be the worst possible outcome of us not solving global warming or climate change? And each of the people in the room, there was about 12 people, each of the different people in the room were given a card, and they had to write down on that card what those things were. Some people went into shock because for some of them, they were around in the 50s and 60s, which in the US, when they were children, they had nuclear war drills and all of that sort of thing. So it actually brought back some of this. These were serious business people and, yeah, pretty high achieving folks. But the question in this case brought on some cataclysmic apocalyptic thoughts, and yeah, they were really struggling with that, which was interesting as a memory that was brought back to them. All right, so that puts you in, so the psychological impacts of that sort of question, because not only did you have to think it, you then had to write it, and then you had to speak it. So every person had to write on their card, think it, write on their card, and then stand up and say what they thought, what they'd written down, right? That's very powerful. So there's a strong psychology in that, a psychological impact. Right, now the next question was, what would be the best possible outcome if we solved global warming and climate change? And of course, that's when you're not going to start with the second one with the worst possible outcome first, because you need to have some hope, right? So worst first, this one second, and that's when people felt so much better. You could see that they uplifted all of a sudden, and so on, and wrote all their things down, were a lot happier, the mood of the room elevated considerably, and they wrote all of the things down. Right, now, and so we consolidated all of that, and agreed and got a whole range of agreement on how we all felt about what would be worst and what would be best. Right, now let's proceed to talk about how we're going to deal with it and what are we going to deal with it. And so that was one of the ways that the Marine Carbon Project started, and why I think in large part it's been quite a success as a project, because it started off with something like that as its starting point. Now, Alan's question of do we all agree that management should be holistic? One could frame that in another way as well and go in and say, right, can we all just workshop what management being holistic means, right? So you could start off with that. That could be number one, right? So everyone writes on a card and says, well, I think holistic, and just could be just popcorning out to a whiteboard some key terms about, or key frames of thought of what management being holistic actually means to them. All right, okay. Now, what would be the worst possible outcomes if, in the context of our operation, that management wasn't holistic? And off they go. And of course, they're not going to have any dramas with framing what that means. Right, okay. Now, what would be the best possible outcomes if management was holistic in this operation? Where are you going to go with that? Right. That then elevates people into a different psyche and a different vibe. And then you can spring, well, one, I would have thought in my experience, having done this with other cases as well, that you're going to be able to spring forth and have a vibe of encouragement and enthusiasm for a process which is going to support that. So there's some of the ways that I would probably be looking at that, Tom, and give that a go. All right. Is any other questions right now? So this is that list, which you've probably already read now, and I've just used our very simple template here. So power of veto, secondaries, and then the physical resources that we have in terms of this is for the Regrarians workplace. What are the rules that we've got? Because the Regrarians workplace is an enterprise of Regrarians, right? So from our perspective, and I've only done this for this one, I've got to do some others. From our perspective, you really should have, in some ways, a context that you've developed for each enterprise. Well, that's the way I would rationalize it. One that's, we developed this in this context that we wanted to have a very clear and transparent understanding to all of you about where we're coming from when we develop these things, and what it really, and I think that helps, because a lot of people put a lot of effort and understanding into their participation in what we do and into the Regrarians workplace. And so we want to be really clear and upfront about what we're putting into this too, and what our intents are. And I think that's appropriate for something like what we're undertaking here. So these are our physical resources, as you can see, and some of that is is not owned by us, but some of it is. These are the human resources. So we have an accountant, we have a team, we've got participants such as yourself, we've got clients, subscribers. Well, the subscribers have become the participants, so this needs to be updated. That's probably going to move to members in future. No worries, Tom, thanks for thanking me. And then we've got sources of income. So again, that's probably going to have to change, because REX programs are not a source of income now, because we've taken out that as an enterprise, as a product. It's now Regrarian subscribers. We have accounts at the Bendigo Bank. Our statement of purpose is there to support and maintain an active, current and creative professional workplace which promotes intergenerational and family and community lives built around regenerative, profitable production, management and educational ecosystems. That needs to be improved. I would say that right off the bat. It's certainly something that I would not remember, and I would lose somebody. It's very jargony, and really needs to be improved and made much more succinct. So that's something I need to personally work on. And that actually, if I remember correctly, I did this in this week at the corresponding Rex, last 13-week Rex. So this was my exercise during that week that I did. So perhaps I can do a bit more work on improving this, particularly that statement of purpose, because I can't recall that I've ever really had a good statement of purpose that I've developed, which is that good elevator speech, if you like, or elevator statement, as people call them. Quality of life, so you can read all of that. So, how do you want your life to be? What's the level of economic being? Now, this is all directly templated from the Savory Institute, the latest from the Savory Institute. So the questions that are there are all of theirs, or how you want your life to be, what level of economic well-being, what relationships you want to have, what are the challenges of growth, and what's the purpose and contribution. So we're using that template here. Then the future resource base, people and land, just looking at those. And then what I did beyond that, just to integrate this and make it a bit more purposeful, I suppose, was to create a list of workplace rules, because these are what frame those rules, what we have here. But I felt that I needed to create a list of rules of everyone's participation in the agrarian's workplace, and so we've written all of that down as well. Yeah. So that's all I have. From that perspective, let's go over to some of these websites. I was going to start to here. So these are all of the links here. So the Savory Institute has a whole bundle of stuff, and again, I don't expect that people will do all of this straight away or within the time of the Rex. You may well get a copy of the textbook, but that's not going to arrive to you in time, I would say. So you'll just do what you can. You may well want to look at some of the ebooks, which are quite useful, if that works. I think it's going to work. So this foundation of holistic management is quite useful, I think. Very simple to read, and that might be a simple one for you to just download and sort of build or expand on your understanding during this week. So I'd highly recommend you did that if you have the capacity to do so, or do that at some other time. Holistic Management International, which are the other main organisation. So there used to be just one, and then the Savory, Alan and Jody and a group of others split from this mob a few years ago. And this mob continues to exist, and they're going on quite nicely as well. So their shop, have a look at what they've got. There's a few different pieces there. I haven't been through all of this for some time to have a look, so maybe that's a bit of work for me this week to just have a look and see what resources they have. I think it's really useful. I think if you're interested in holistic management, the In Practice journal is really good to get, but they have quite a lot of pieces in here which will be really useful for you. So have a look in there. But again, I'll have a look myself and get back to you during the week. Bruce Ward, the late Bruce Ward, was a friend of ours, and it's very sad that he died. And his son, David Ward, is on the workplace, so you can check in with him. And David and his brother Andrew. So Bruce, back in the day, used to have this website which was called Holistic Results, and he was a fairly early adopter in doing online training. and having online resources. And so when after Bruce died, David and Andrew decided, and Bruce's wife Susie decided to turn this resource over to the public. So beforehand, it was only available by paid subscription, and now the whole resource is public, and it's brilliant. Bruce was a really, really great educator, really clear communicator. I do know that a lot of people who've watched and listened to Bruce over time have got a tremendous amount out of it. So if you do have a bit of time there, please do what you can there to have a look through Bruce's stuff. So yeah, we've certainly been influenced by it. It's really, really great stuff. So Helen Lewis, I need to honour her and the work that Helen's done with what we referenced before, and I think Ray and Sam could acknowledge Helen's value to them as a friend and mentor. Helen and her husband Ian are graziers in near Warwick in southeastern Queensland, a beautiful part of the world, and yeah, they're really lovely, decent people who are contributing quite very sensible, straightforward approaches to all of this sort of stuff that speaks to farmers at level's not the right word, but speaks in a language that is not too lofty and not too intellectual and not too verbose. Yeah, it's very, very good stuff. So if any of you are interested in, Helen again is on the workplace, so you might want to check in with her, and I'm sure that Ray and Sam would only endorse what I've said. Another person of interest who's on the workplace is Graham Hand, who's a good friend of ours, and Graham is a really, like Helen, a cut to the chase sort of person, and done a really good job. He's got a financial planning program which is coming up in Tassie. He also did one online with us, and if you go back to the week 10 Rex archives, you'll see that yeah, Graham contributed quite a bit to that, so you can check in on some of his presentations there, so which you have access to. And as planner subscribers, I think you also have access to this particular program which he did, which was a webinar program on holistic financial planning, so you can have a look at that. But Graham's also a consultant, so like Helen, if you want to work with someone after the Rex or during or whatever to help you professionally develop some of these things, then these are people that I would recommend that you work with. They're really, really smart, savvy operators with good track records of working with people. Javan Badakovic. Javan is a bit of a different cat in terms, in the scheme of things, that he's not a producer per se. So both Helen and Graham both have properties and are professional producers. Javan's you might say a life coach, but his background is in financial planning. So he's got a degree in commerce, and he did the first 2 Rexes with us, where he built holistic life context. So not holistic context, holistic life context, and does a really good job. I would say that the big comment on Javan's stuff is it's really high level. And that was some of the comment that we got from some people, that they found that most people absolutely resonated with Javan. He's a brilliant, super smart guy. Anyone who's met him will listen to him. But for some people, his stuff was probably a bit too high level, as it were. But that was very few, and that's why, in part, we've decided to take the tack we have, where we've brought it all back down, but said to people, look, if you're interested in taking another approach or looking at other approaches here, then there are those that are available. And Javan is in the workplace, and he did say to me in a call the other day, a private call, that he said, with the Rex coming up, he said, if anybody's interested in talking to him about holistic context and whatnot, then please call upon him. He's very happy to help, which is really kind of him. We appreciate that as a member of the Regrarians team. Dan Palmer is another person who's on the workplace. I haven't seen him contribute too much to date because he's a pretty busy guy with all the stuff that he's got going on. Dan, I introduced Dan to holistic management, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago or so now. And his organisation hosted me to do some introductory workshops. And with that, now Dan's a permaculture designer, I suppose he would call himself. He's got a company with another couple of people called Very Edible Gardens, and they do small farm design and urban edible landscape design and installations, particularly in Melbourne, here in Victoria. And they give workshops and they do permaculture design courses. I think they've just finished one now. And Dan is his career before that was as a doctor of philosophy, so he's sort of coming back to his roots a bit, and this sort of turned him on in a big way. I would say the permaculture stuff turned him on, but this really turned him on because of all of the philosophy and psychology and all the rest of it that's embedded in all of this. So definitely check out Dan's stuff. He's done a really good job. He's worked pretty closely with Javin. Javin and he have talked a lot about their work in holistic context development and decision making, which is really interesting because it's outside of the Savory Institute and Holistic Management International bubble, if you like. And sometimes you can get some innovation on that. So yeah, well worth having a look at what Dan's doing. And I believe his workshops are really good. He's a really solid man and good friend of ours, again, on the workplace. So, and then there's another cat out there who's pretty interesting and a really divisive character, this bloke, Jordan Peterson, who is a very interesting fellow. And he's working with a number of other folks, psychologists, and what they've developed is this self-authoring suite. And I've put this here because I think that this is, again, you've got to have the options, and I think it's important to not just be within the silos of holistic management or this or that. There's other people who are out there who are doing some really interesting things, and I would say sort of tackling the same problems or the same challenges, but just doing it in a different way. And for some of you, you may well resonate with an approach like this more than you might with some of the approaches that I've put before you already. And I think it doesn't hurt. This stuff really, I would say, is this is where it's quite different. The self-authoring is about the self. It's not about an organisation. And I don't know how one would apply this to an organisation, but anyway, you have to pay for this. So this is, I think it's about $30. Yeah, here we are. Purchase now. Yeah, it's $30 to do this, and you get a 2-for-1. So you and your partner might want to do this together. It does take a fair bit of work, from what I understand. I've not done it myself. I've bought it, but I've not done it. It's a bit of a project for some period in the future. But yeah, it does take a bit of work to go through. It seems from what I've looked at so far to be quite straightforward, a lot of multiple choice to go through and whatnot. So it uses a few different approaches, but definitely makes one look at who you are quite closely. So that's well worth looking at if that's of interest. And then the other one, which is from the same organisation of people, and I showed some of you the outcomes of one that I did, was some sort of personality assessment. I think that this is really helpful, again, in that analysis of the individual, who we really are ourselves, and just, as it says here, see yourself in a new light. Just understand yourself a bit better, so that you can go along the pathway of doing a better job of, well, A, being a better person, but B, developing a better holistic context. I think it definitely helps all of that. And it may be that this is all you do. I mean, like everything in the REX program, it's completely optional. If you choose to not do anything for the rest of the program except listen in to these webinars, and that's all you do, well, that's completely up to you. And we have had a number of people who've done that. But then there's others who do try and get 95% because that's the way they're built. And that's part of this assessment is, as it's seen here, you would probably rate high in conscientiousness when you look at the various parameters that are assessed here. So I definitely, this is about $10, I think, to do this. I think it's a really interesting one. There are probably there are other ones out there. I just found this one to be I just found it to be effective. I found it in its assessment and revealing its assessment to my family. They thought it was quite accurate when they looked at me, and I'd be interested to have others do the same so that we can see if they feel similarly. But yeah, that's another one that's there. What else did we have? Yeah, that was it. So if there's any other questions before we kick on, in terms of this week and our task work, well, the task work is really for you to develop a holistic context, or at the very least, no, sorry, that's not right. The task work for this week is to understand. Sorry, I've got ahead of myself. That's next week, is to develop a holistic context. The task for this week is to go and look at some of these resources and get a better understanding and use the workplace, this week's week. So we go to week. So what I want you to do in week 2 is I want you to, so we'll just have a look at that. Home. So we'll go to R13, week 2. Okay. So go through and have a look at some of the stuff that others have done. So Dan Harris has put some stuff in here, which has been great. There's a bit of background there, people's holistic context that they've developed using the various frameworks or templates and so on. So yeah, have a look at that. Get a bit of sense of what the holistic context means and which pathway you may well want to follow. All right, so what have we got here? Question of where did Jordan Peterson fit in? Well, Jordan Peterson is one of the people that is behind the self-authoring program. He and a couple of other psychologists and a software developer, so who developed, no doubt, the algorithms that. So this is all multiple choice, and Dr. Peterson is a pretty renowned psychologist. He has particular views that some people will and won't resonate with, and beliefs. He's become quite famous, and some people, like a lot of people, will resonate with, and others they will not. He has a particular narrative that a lot of people do not resonate with at all, but that in itself is an interesting observation. Yes, he is an interesting cat, among others. Where are those resources? I'm having difficulty in finding things. Where are the links? This is from Ojiba. I think that's Dave McGee. Where are the links, for example, that Darren said we should look up? Well, what will happen, Dave, is that as soon as we're done here, I will give you this link. Now, because you didn't come in until after we started, just to give you a quick inkling, if you go to, we'll go over there. So I've got a lot of stuff on here. Planner subscribers. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing here, sorry. So there's a group that you're a part of, David, and it's called the Regrarians Planner Subscribers. Consider that to be the Rex homepage, right? So the Rex, so right, I just could call that as well. But you're a Planner subscriber, so that's our homepage. Now, in here, we post the links to a whole range of things. But let's just go through that, and other people might find this useful as well. So I will post. So the key things that you need to look at and for in this particular group is the webinar calendar. So this is the list of all of the webinars that there are. And I'll just click on that so you can see what that looks like. Oh, sorry, that's the calendar. Pardon me. I'll just go back. Oh, that's the calendar. Let's go to the webinar links. This is the one I was meant to be looking at. So the webinar links. So there's a table that's got each of the webinars that we've got ahead of us, and those are replaced with. Yep, so a few of you are in there now. So those will be replaced. The Zoom links will be replaced with the YouTube link as it is, as the recording is put on YouTube and processed and available. Right. So that's number one. So that's a really important place to put. Notwithstanding, before each webinar, I send you all a note, and I put onto here a link to whatever the next session is, right? Secondly, is this Google Drive. So the Google Drive, which is the meta drive, if you like, for this Rex program, has that webinars links in there. It has any podcasts that we've made of any presentations that we've done. So you can click on that and it'll show you those. The presentations, so for example, these resources, so this is, and I know a couple of people have already opened, so that's last week's presentation is listed there, right? So you can go back and look at that, right? You can either watch the webinar or you can go back and look at it. This week's is right here. So you can click on that and it's there. I'll put on next week's before we start next week as well, right? So on we go there. You've got your task work. So I don't know if you've been in here. Yep, you've already been in here. So there's that. That's all there. So you've at least got some familiarity. It seems you've got a bit of familiarity. Other resources that are there. It looks like Regrarians checklist, Colin Gordon. I'm going to have to move you. So we'll put you in pass folder. We've got a Colin Gordon. We need to go in there. Item is already in this folder, so there's a copy there. So we might just get rid of that, given it's already in there. Remove. So, and there's a few other bits in there that you might want to look at, but it seems like you have been in there. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, just let me know, and now's the time to do it while we're speaking live, because it's a lot more responsive, you might say. Any other queries or questions? Anybody got a question they want to ask in person in the last 6 or so minutes that we've got before we go? No hands up. Okay. I might, where was that? What I might do is grab a, what do we got there? That's Georgie saying something. What I might do is just grab that those rules, just in case people want to use that template. Regrarians, just can't remember where I put it. Regrarians workplace rules, there we are. Okay, where is that? Okay, so I'll make a copy. Okay. Can you review, yep, do you, and can you review our checklist and give feedback? Yes, I only do that. It's a good point that you raised there, Blair. What we ask people to do, and again, these are all details that might take a little bit of time before people remember them. So the other place to go to here, so we'll go to R13 week 1. So if you've done your checklist, and it's important what you need to do, as some people have done. So, for example, here's an example. So, Jemmy and her group, what they did was exactly like you meant to do. So, if you've got something for me to review, they've gone to the relevant week. So, in this case, it's week 1, which is where we're looking at the checklist. And what they've done is they've written a post in here. So, they've written a post. They've tagged me so that I know that it exists as a post. And then they've linked the particular Google Drive document into here. They've done that. And then what I've done is I've come in, I've read through it, and then I've gone through and given them my response to that. Some of that's just endorsement, some of it's further questions, and and so on. So that's what you need to do. If you don't do that, then I'm not going to go through each and every one of your task work folders here. The responsibility is on you to use the workplace as the place where we have our chats about things. Because if I do it within Google Drive, it's all over the shop. It's not a good place to do revisions. Okay, so that's the way we do it. Very good, very generous. Oh no, you've been very generous because you're financially supporting our livelihood and this Regrarians project. So we use the principle of Pichanjara principle of Napaji, which is mutual respect, mutual responsibility. So in this case, our respect is there. Our responsibility is to do what we can to work within the frameworks that we've developed here. Okay, so thank you for that, Blair. Dismiss. Where can we find the Graham Hand course? Right, so here we'll go to Ron webinars. I know there's a lot. There's so many things in here. It's quite a big place. So here's the ROM webinar. So all of the planner subscribers, one of the things that you get access to at this stage is all of the ROM webinars, and so that's the list of webinars in there. And yeah, so you can go for your life in there. Actually, I don't know what happened there. Just let me go back a moment. Yeah, I clicked on the wrong thing. Yeah, so there's all of the YouTubes and the podcasts from that particular series for you to go and check out. I'd recommend probably yeah, so I've answered that. Oh, damn. So yeah, so that's the place to go there. So where do, the next question I think again is from Dave, where do we find all that we have access to as planner subscribers? That's a really good question, Dave, and I've probably, well, I sound probably, I don't think I've handled that as well as I could, perhaps because no one's actually asked me and I'm a bit responsive sometimes to, because like a lot of people, I can't predict every question that ever comes. So perhaps, well, the first thing to do, if you want to take on a bit of this yourself, is if you go to regrarians.org and we look at the planner plan that you signed up on, there's things that you have access to, right? And they're listed here. So Ron access, the handbook, blah, 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 blah. So that's the list of, we've gone to the trouble of putting all of that together and little call outs which explain that to you. So when you look at Ron access, for example, I don't know that there's much else there. So let's have a look at that. So when we look at RON access, I've just shown you how to get there. The Regrarian's Handbook, well, you've already got access to that in the Google Drive, and so on. The Our Consult, well, that's for you to organise. It's there. I've put up that a number of times, and you may well have missed because you're fairly new, that if you have a 1 hour one-on-one with me, and a number of you have already used that or used part of it. That's for you to organise. The way you do that is you go on to, just so we get that ticked off, you go on to the Regrarian's website, go to About and our calendar, and make a time. You'll see that we've embedded in our Google Calendar, so it shows that when I'm available and when I'm not. And from that, you'll go down to here and you'll click on Meeting Hour, and you'll make a time that works based on what time availability I've got there. And that should be, make sure that the time is fits with both you and us, because your time zones are obviously, for many of you, going to be different. That's how you organise that meeting. I'll get a notification. I'll then send you, close to the date, a link to, we'll either talk through the chat of the workplace, or we'll set up a Zoom meeting depending on what's required. But yes, what else did we have there? Did I just get rid of that? And I'll go back to home. Oh, plan, there we are. The 10-week archive and the 13-week archive. Well, the archives are very easily found. So if you are looking for any of the 10-week program archives, just put in R10, and then you'll see all of that's the 10-week Rex program archives are all there. So you have access to that, and there's a ton of different conversation that goes on in there. So yeah, knock yourself out. Then you can go to R10 and go week 2 and so on. So that's the archives there. And for the 13 week, well, you're in the 13 week, so you'll be adding to the archive that's developed. And so you need to understand that if you have stuff that you don't want people to look at perpetually, because that's the way we've developed this, then don't put it in there. Make it private. Create your own private group, the Ojibo group, or whatever you want to call it, the Dave McGee group, or just send it to me privately through the chat, and that's the way you can deal with it there. Okay. I think that deals with it, but perhaps it would be helpful if I did a post in the planner group, which had all of the links to the different things you meant to have access to as planner subscribers. So thanks for that tip and suggestion. Instigation, Dave. All right, best place for climate details for Australia to complete the checklist. Yeah, great question. Best place is the Bureau of Meteorology, and this one here, climate data. So you can see I go that spot pretty regularly. So I'll just pop that in for you there. Type answer. Now, don't be sorry for being late, mate. I mean, you got here just in time, so it's all good. I'm just glad that you got here. So that's the most important thing. And realise too that you've signed up for a year, so it's not like we're playing a long game here, not the short game. So we've set this all up so that we can support you, and not just during the Rex where it's the most intense support, but outside of that when we're all, we're going to be there. So, and you'll do another Rex during this period. So like we said last week, pick what you want to do out of this one. You might just sit back and just watch the webinars and just soak it all up and get familiar with the workplace. There's a lot going on. Go and look at the archives and do what you can to broaden your scope there. And then come back and go, well, I'm going to wait until the next Rex, which will probably be in about June or July. of 2019 at this stage. And if we do that, then, or when we do that, you might go, okay, well, I'm really going to dive in and do what I can there. And if we happen to do another one within the time period that, which is probable, we'll probably do another one later on that year, depending on what we've got going on. Then you can get in there and do another one, provided that fits within your subscription timetable. So, yeah, it's all cool, mate. Just good that you're in here. That's the most important thing. So this particular website is where we go typically, and you can get all sorts of data about your area. Some of it's going to be scant, some of it's going to be general, but that's what you might. So there's a whole range of different data that people excuse me, that people have accessed here. Weather and climate, rainfall, Weather and climate's really useful. There's a whole range of stuff that comes from that and so on. So just have a look. Oh, that went down the wrong way. All right, well, we're over time now. Thank you for all hanging in there today. It's been quite a long morning and a lot to go through. I look forward to your follow-ups and your questions, and really appreciate you joining us, and look forward to a week where we spend the time to understand holistic context and any variations on that. So with that, I want to thank you all and wish you a very good morning.